So will this deal hold? Let's ask retired Air Force General David Deptula. General, welcome.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Obviously a very fragile situation, sir. You know the hatred on both sides of this issue. Does the deal hold?
Well, it is, as Congressman Smith mentioned, it's going to be really, really challenging. I think there is a motivation on both sides to assure that it does. But, you know, the perceptions, particularly inside Israel, are divided over the deal. 30% saying the ceasefire is a surrender to Hamas, and about 70% embracing it as a start to get the remaining hostages back. So while it's challenging and much can affect the deal, I mean, if Hamas breaks the ceasefire, then Israel can continue firing, but then the remaining hostages would continue to suffer. So that's the quandary that Israel faces, and it's part of the motivation, again, on both sides, to do their best to assure that it continues.
Do you expect the regime in Tehran to do everything possible to try to derail this agreement?
Yes, because that's the way Iran rolls. Now, the good side of that, quite frankly, is that Israel understands the value of hard power and how to use it. They've been successful in negating both Hamas and Hezbollah. Assad and Syria is now gone, and Iran is the weakest it's ever been. So while they might try to do that, they do it at their own risk, because you know, Iran is in the, as I mentioned, the weakest position it ever has been in. And quite frankly, the sooner it can be removed, or the regime can be removed or replaced, the better for the whole world. So I'm sure that's being considered right now.
You are a retired Air Force Lieutenant General. I thank you for your service, sir. What's your assessment of the way the Israeli government has carried out this military operation against its adversaries in the region so far?
I think their strategy has been absolutely spot on. As I mentioned, they understand the use and the value of hard power. They've put it to good use. They've changed the complexion of the entire region that they've got to operate in. They've reduced these terrorist organizations, and now, I believe, rightfully has Iran in the crosshairs.
We know President-elect Trump has been hoping to wind down the war in Ukraine, perhaps as soon as day one. Now some of his advisors are kind of backing off of that, saying maybe in the first 100 days. Do you think Mr. Trump can score another victory here?
Well, I hope so. I mean, the fact of the matter is, everyone wants to see peace except Putin. I think what you'll see is a continued new emphasis, well, not a continued, but a new emphasis on negotiations. Now, negotiation means give and take between both sides, but Putin does not understand give. He only understands take. He only responds to power. Now, we both know that President-elect Trump has adopted the Reagan-era approach of peace through strength. So I believe that what we're going to see is continued support to Ukraine from the U.S., but with conditions. Those conditions being that President Zelensky is willing to consider halting operations in place in Ukraine's eastern territories. And then there's the issue of conditions on Russia. I think one part of President Trump's plan may be economic, such as lowering the price cap on Russia's oil exports along with stronger enforcement of sanctions. In other words, put crushing sanctions and economic costs on Putin to incentivize him to agree to a ceasefire.
Is part of the pitch from the U.S. that essentially Zelensky is going to have to give up some of that territory in the east to Russia, and then the rebuilding of Ukraine can begin?
You know, I don't think that's the proper way to characterize the situation in order to incentivize Putin. It's not about, it's just what I said before, it's not about, you know, giving up territory to Putin. It's about making sure that he understands the consequences of not agreeing to a ceasefire. It's really important to understand that Ukraine's now become the strategic safeguard of the West. And so its survival and redevelopment are priorities, not just for the security of Europe, but also the United States. So the message that President Trump wants to send is one of strength. That's the approach that I think he needs to take.
What about the price that Putin and Russian forces have paid because this war has been a lot more difficult than they ever anticipated?
Well, I think that's a motivator for Putin. But remember, Putin doesn't care about human life.
Right.
He's been spending 1,000 to 1,500 lives per day. He only cares about restoring the Russian Empire. And it's a critical U.S. security objective not to let that happen. I'm sure that's part of President Trump's calculus, but we need to keep the pressure on Russia, as it's in our strategic interest to see them further weakened.
Lieutenant General David Deptula, thank you so much for your time, sir. I appreciate your analysis.
Have a great day.